Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video. I'm trying something new with the lighting because I've been getting feedback, which thank you. We figured out the mic situation, and now we're going to figure out light one step at a time. But I hope that everyone had a great holiday weekend. If you guys celebrated, hopefully you made it through with your family. And in this video, I wanted to talk about how I created empathy, because the religious community, and if you're here, you know this is a channel that has to do with dealing with religious trauma, which is just trauma, but God did it. But the religious community claims to be very charitable, very empathetic, very loving, very, quote, selfless. And if you grew up in that environment, you know that it is almost the exact opposite of what they are. And they are actually the ones that will disown their children, that will be incredibly cruel if you choose to live any other style of life than the very narrow one that they have decided that you should live. And for me personally, the most cruel and inhumane actions that have ever been done to me or said to me have all been by people claiming to be Christian. And I think it's fairly a common occurrence to happen, and it's because people cannot see themselves correctly if they have ascribed a personality to themselves. And what I mean by that is, if I think that I am a very generous person, and if you come and you ask me for something, or there's an opportunity for me to be generous and I don't take it, and somebody says, "Why didn't you take it? I thought you were generous." In my head, I still am. And I have a really good reason why I didn't help you or why I wasn't generous. But in my head, I'm a generous person. So there's nothing that you can say to me that will make me think otherwise, even if my actions are not generous or my words are not generous. If in my head, I'm a generous person, there's nothing you can say to convince me otherwise. And growing up in the religious environment, I'm sure you've run across those people that are maybe incredibly cruel or just terrible human beings, but in their mind, they're really good people, and you can never convince them otherwise. But this video is about you and me and how I was able to create empathy. Because as you know, the abusive religious mindset, if you grew up in that or if you were in contact with that, a lot of these people are narcissists, just like classic by the book narcissist. And it's because we are taught to always think of ourselves and how we're coming across, how we are reflecting on God. What other people in the church think of us really matters, or in my case, what other people in the cult thought of me really mattered. And so you're always thinking of yourself, because the setup is that you have to police yourself. So in coming out of that and in trying to interact with other people, it was really difficult to build bonds with other people because I was always thinking of myself. And you could not tell me that I was a narcissist. You could not tell me that I was selfish or that I didn't think of other people, because in my head, I'm a loving, generous extension of Christ. So if you don't think that I'm generous and selfless, then you're wrong. I'm not wrong. And I want to talk about when I started to develop empathy and how I did it, because I think it's something really important. And when you come out of something that is abusive, a lot of times your mindsets don't change, they go with you. And as you're trying to become someone who is not like the person that did the abuse to you, you have to rehaul almost all of your mindsets. And the ability to feel empathy for someone is not a Christian mindset. It is a human mindset. And those are two very different things. And so the way that I was able to create empathy within myself was to learn how to be self-sufficient. And if it doesn't sound like there's a tie, wait, because I'm about to tie it together. So for me, whenever I would hear like so-and-so is sick or so-and-so needs this or that, you first think, oh, poor person, let me pray for them, because that's the immediate conditioning that you have, is like, how sad, let me pray for them. The second thing that comes in is, what did they do to deserve it, and how does this affect me? And that's the Christian mindset part, because as you know, if you did something, quote, bad, or something, quote, bad happened to you, that means Satan was attacking you, or you did something that you must have deserved it. Because if God is all-knowing and all-loving, and something terrible happens to you, it must be your fault. So there's the initial, like, let me pray for them because that way everyone thinks I'm a good person. But the underlying message is that they must have done something to deserve it. And then the how does it affect me part is the part where somebody was supposed to come to your party and bring the cake, but they got sick. And you say, sorry, hope you feel better. And then there's the resentment and the anger, and you're mad because now you won't have a cake at your party. And that's really upsetting. And this person always disappoints you, and this person is always flaky, and and it's that kind of rundown because you feel personally affected by these people's actions. A really extreme one is I had, when I first left, there was somebody who was supposed to go into the hospital and get a procedure done. And it was a very minor procedure, but they felt safe with this one doctor that they had been seeing. And the doctor got into a car accident and ended up in a coma. This person, when they heard the news, said, well, now who's going to do my surgery? And they were very upset with the doctor who was now in the coma. They were mad at them for not looking both ways, for not making it right with God before they got in the car. They were really angry at this person who was in a coma because they felt negatively affected. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what creates that, of how does something bad happen to someone else and you immediately think of yourself. You immediately feel upset at the person that had something bad happen to them. And I did a lot of trying to think my way through this and feel my way through it and understand it. And the way that I started to build empathy in myself was to build self-sufficiency, because if I'm negatively impacted by something that is outside of my control, I know that I can create that again. And so I know that I'm sufficient. So I can fully show up for the other person and say, what do you need? How can I be there? Because one, I don't think they deserve it. And two, I can have it not negatively affect me. So for example, with the person with the cake, super easy. I can either not have cake at my party, which is a very simple thing to do, or I can go get one. It's really that simple. So in which case, if I'm not thinking about how am I negatively affected, then I can just fully show up for this person and say oh my God, I hope you're okay. Don't even worry about it. You're good. And I can mean that, as opposed to being why did this person get sick? Why are they always doing this to me? And then in the case of the doctor, this person ended up going in to have this procedure done. And it was a very simple procedure. And someone else in the hospital did it. And it was that simple. But they still felt a lot of anger at the doctor, that the doctor had betrayed them by getting into a car accident. And it's these big reaches, because when you were raised in a really ridiculous, mentally unhealthy, completely irrational religious mindset, it makes you make those connections, because again, you think that God is in control. And if you think that God is in control and is all-knowing and all-loving, and then something bad happens to someone, you really cannot feel empathy for it, because there's the block. And the block is that God did it, so something they did must have deserved it. And when you are trying to pull yourself out of the religious mindset, that's a really, really big one. And you might not be as empathetic as you think you are. And I think that's true for everybody, everywhere, all the time, including myself. But in my desire to be more empathetic to people, the thing that I grow is self-sufficiency. So that when somebody gives me news, it doesn't put me in a deficit, in which case I can fully be there with them and ask them what they need and what I can do. And it makes me show up a lot better for my friends and my family, because if they're going through pain, I don't want my subconscious to be what'd they do to deserve it? Or oh my God, this again, which it really used to do, because I hadn't fully weeded out the idea that if something bad happens to you, you must have deserved it. And now that that mindset is gone, because I understand where it came from, I uprooted it, I understand that like life is just life. Stuff happens. You don't deserve the bad things that happen to you. And once I did that, then I really thought about, okay, if somebody doesn't deserve this bad thing happening to them, how can I show up and then listen or be there or offer help? And that comes from me being self-sufficient in myself so that I feel I can offer something and it doesn't put me at a deficit to offer it. And I hope that makes sense. So there's a lot in that because there's also the development of boundaries so that somebody doesn't just take from you. But I think it's very important, especially if you are newly out of something that was religious, that your mindset grew in. When I say newly, I mean the first, the first 3 to 7 years. But even then, if you're never going to undo these mindsets, then the timeline gets much longer. But if it's something that you are actively trying to undo, really look at whether or not you have empathy and if it is a conscious thing that you've ever tried to grow, or if you have just assumed that you have it because you were taught to, quote, be loving or be a listening ear, which is a whole other thing. But a lot of the, quote, good things that have been ascribed to you, sometimes that means that you have picked up the identity because you like it, but you haven't actually developed it. And so in order to develop empathy, do you know what you do? And for me, this is just what I do, which is why I want to share it. But I make myself very self-sufficient so that when I hear someone else's, quote, bad news, I know that I am not put at a deficit. And what I can do is rise up to the occasion and say, how can I help you? Or what do you need? Or I'm so sorry. Do you need a listening ear? Like, what can I do? And it's because their pain doesn't put me at a lack. And I know that. So I can show up and try and be there for them in any capacity that I can, because they're the ones that are in pain. So hopefully this all makes sense. This was just something that I had seen come up a couple of times. And if you find yourself still judging people harshly, and here's the thing that's like super uncomfortable, is once you're out of the religious mindset, what I found is that I would look back at the religious community and think like the religious community is just made up of pieces of shit. Like everyone there is just terrible. And that was because that had been my experience. And I just assumed that if you believed in God, that meant you were really stupid. And I really felt that. And it was very difficult for me to try and see them as human beings. But I wanted to, because I knew that it put me in a really bad spot mentally to see someone else as subhuman. And that was something that I had only learned because I had been treated that way. But I knew that I didn't want to continue that. I knew that the mindset itself is the thing that's bad. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian and you have that mindset, or if you're an atheist or a Buddhist, whatever. That mindset itself is corrupt, and I didn't want it. And so in order for me to develop empathy and to try to understand someone else's point of view and to try and show up fully in the moment, I had to feel like nothing that would happen would put me at a deficit. And because of that, I can show up fully alive and engage with you and meet you where you are and understand that we're kind of both doing our best here. And how can I do my best and meet you as a human being, like face to face? We're equals, we're meeting each other, and how can we help each other? So that's my little spiel on empathy. That is how I create empathy for other people, is by creating self-sufficiency in myself, which allows me to show up for others. So if you have something that you do that helps you create empathy, maybe it's a meditation practice, maybe you've learned how to listen, maybe you've cultivated something in yourself, and if so, drop it below. Or if you've read something that really helped to enlighten you, to help you see something in a different way, drop those resources below. I would like this to be a page of resource for you. And that's just how I do it. I hope that it's useful. I hope that there's something useful in there for y'all. And hopefully the lighting was good. Give me feedback on that as well, because I listen, I try to. And thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.